The situation on the Ottoman border required bold, urgent and decisive action supported by a realm united in common cause, and in 1495 decisive action was taken. King Wladislav II gathered an army and marched down south to force the surrender of Lovro who called the king an ox and conspired against him again. Soon after, Lovro submitted to the king in order to retrieve his confiscated estates. Now Lovro was an unpopular troublemaker at this point. Wladislav did not risk anything by using force to deal with him. But King Wladislav couldn't take any other bold, urgent and decisive action. Firstly, it wasn't in his nature. Secondly, he did not want to get dragged into factional struggles and jeopardize his delicately balanced support structure. This left the urgently needed reform of the realm up to the Royal Council and the Diet of the realm. But the two bodies were divided internally and pitted against each other. The Royal Council was full of rich magnates and prelates, all secure in their positions, all with their own ideas and concerns, who now expected that they would be directing the internal and external affairs of the realm as they saw fit, with the consensus of their own little circle. The problem to that was that the Diet of the realm was outright dominated by the growing number of minor nobles whose concerns were very local, particular, and existential, and they saw most of the magnates on the Royal Council as corrupt threats. This growing, let's call it, movement of the minor nobility was not a phenomenon isolated to the realm of Saint Stephen. When King Maximilian summoned the Imperial Diet of Worms in 1495 in order to raise money to defend against the Ottomans and intervene against the King of France in Italy, he was faced with demands for wider imperial reform, and among them were demands from the minor counts and imperial knights for more representation and protection of their rights against the more powerful estates of the empire. Numerically, the minor nobility was the majority of the nobility, while in Western Europe the nobility numbered around 1 in 100 of the population. As you went further east, the proportion of the nobility in the population increased. In the realm of Saint Stephen, it was around 1 in 25 people. In Poland it reached around 1 in 10. The reasons for this are tied to population density, legal and cultural particularities around who can even be considered nobility, and how land and titles were inherited. The reasons why the minor nobility was growing angry at this time was that they feared losing their wealth and position in society. They were no longer being completely relied upon for either military or administrative services. Some of those jobs were being taken by mercenaries and university graduates. With new socioeconomic structures developing, they saw more urban commoners and merchants amassing wealth, while even some peasants were becoming richer than some minor nobles. The small plots of land the minor nobility had were becoming economically insufficient. Inheritance was dividing the land up into smaller and smaller parcels between a growing number of people, and others were trying to acquire those plots of land, or the workforce on them, from their weaker neighbors. In the realm of Saint Stephen, the minor nobility feared losing everything. If their peasants fled, they would be forced to either face the humiliation of working their own land, going to beg for employment, or be forced to sell their land and lose their status. So an idea begins to gain greater strength, that most of the legal protections for the peasantry should be done away with, that peasants should be tied to the land they worked for longer, if not forever, and that new taxes on the peasants and serfs should be implemented. What the minor nobility lacked for in wealth and influence, it made up for in numbers and the capacity and willingness to threaten and use violence to enforce their views and achieve their ends. The new parliamentarism that came with the ascendance of King Wladislav II also gave the minor nobility a strong voice in the affairs of the realm. Sensing opportunity for advancement, Stephen Zápolya became their champion and with their support the new Palatine. Soon most of the minor nobility's anger was directed towards Zápolya's rivals on the royal council, especially Chancellor Thomas Bakac of Erdod, who became the symbol of systemic failures and corruption. The accusations against Bakac were not unfounded. He was responsible for the appointment of most officials in the realm. Some of them were highly educated young priests and clerics, others were his own kinsmen. Bakac is also accused of bribing people with positions in the Hungarian church. He is accused of taking bribes from Venetian agents. He is also accused of manipulating nobles with no heirs of their own into signing their lands to his nephews. Out of the lines of those nephews would come the prominent noble family of Erdodi. But I digress. Zápolya's anachronistically called National Party had its first big successes at the Diet of 1495. A law was passed that confirmed the right, no, the obligation, of all the nobility to appear in person at the Diet. This would be followed by a law in 1498 that added penalties for absentee nobles. The minor nobility was further strengthened in 1495 by a law that gave more power to the local assemblies of the nobility, to confirm or reject the decisions made by the royally appointed Ispans and Zsupans, and the king was no longer allowed to grant those positions in perpetuity. Another law in 1495 struck at the church, limiting the authority of the papacy in the realm, and the nobility was given the right to collect their taxes before the church collected the tithe. Meanwhile, a wholly different development was taking place in Bohemia. The confessional conflict of the past was replaced with an economic conflict. Decades of civil war and unrest had drastically reduced the peasant workforce available, either because of death or the peasants fleeing to towns and cities. This, of course, drastically reduced noble estate incomes. Due to this, some nobles resorted to mercenary work or banditry. Others attempted to tie their peasants to the land. But some, especially the bigger landholders, tried to get in on lucrative enterprises. Ponds were constructed across estates in Bohemia so that nobles could profit off of selling fish. Others saw that they could muscle in on lucrative businesses that were legally in the purview of the urban guilds, specifically beer production. After all, they owned the land that made the ingredients. They could take them as their share of taxes from their peasants. All they needed was to open breweries, which they did, and with their noble privileges, no costs of ingredients, and tax exemptions, they could undercut the urban guilds and rake in the profits. And when the free royal cities protested and attempted to stop this economic encroachment, insisting on their liberties, the privileges of their guilds to give out licenses and ensure quality and control the prices, and the city's right to tax incoming and outgoing goods, the nobles simply set up their own little market towns. And slowly the Bohemian nobility, no longer divided by confession, united to curb the economic and political privileges of the free royal cities, while the cities themselves realized that they were now outnumbered in the Diet. Where once they had confessional allies, were now their economic and political adversaries.